Hi, folks. My name is Alden Madge-Flieger.
And I'm Sayaka Yoshino.
I'm Sayaka Ueda.
Our presentation is called Falling Through the Cracks. We will be analyzing issues international students have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic and then putting forward a solution to help accommodate these issues that have come up in this new normal. So before reaching our solution, first we'll go through the 4 issues we've identified primarily facing international students. Those issues are financial aid, travel restriction, residences, and time zones and coursework. The first issue we will look at is financial aid. The main issue with international students with this is the lack of financial aid. To use Canada as an example, international students in Canada were not eligible for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. International students could only benefit from the CERB program, which was dependent on employment and was less accessible for students, especially full-time students. Cancellations or those planning on a job did not qualify, leaving many out. People could not return to their home country and had no income while in Canada in some cases. Additional issues in Japan for stable economic support are also relevant, and many nations with a large international student present faced a real issue of the possibility of losing students. So to give an example of how the CERB program worked in Canada, it was only eligible for those who were over 15 years old, had to stop working because of reasons related to COVID-19, earned at least $5,000 in 2019 or the last 12 months, and who have not voluntarily had to quit their jobs. For many international students, this was much too specific to receive aid, and it led a lot of people to not be able to benefit from these responses. Now, clearly, there's already a moral implication to this issue, but there's also a strong economic implication. International students contribute much greater tuition than domestic students. In Canada, 650,000 students contribute more than $21 billion to the economy through this avenue. This is an issue for the US and Japan as well, with uncertainty across the world. If nations can't support their international students in times of need, they run the risk of not having them return. So now we'll take a look at the travel restrictions. Restrictions led to many issues. No air travel from the onset of pandemic caused great issues for the well-being of international students in securing residence, income, and ensuring safety. Having no guaranteed entry back into Canada for students that left created great uncertainty. Specific exemptions were not very helpful, guidelines could be vague, and study permits did not always line up. It took a very long time for more detailed implementations in Canada's circumstances, with complete information not arriving until November. To take a quote from a friend of mine at the University of Alberta, it took the government of Canada 8 months to have concrete protocol for international students to enter the country. I wish that came earlier because I needed to see my family and I couldn't do that for so long because of the uncertainty. And this is just one quote in a sea of so many similar situations.
Okay, now let's look at the residence part. After all classes switched to online classes, many schools were closed, including students' residences, and a large number of international students find that they have no longer a place to live. Some very supportive colleges allow all international students to continue to live on campus, as well as providing services like meals. However, some other colleges close all buildings on campus, including students' residences, and request students to move out. Then international students trying to find places to live using social media, and they end up living in others' living room or even basements for a while. Here's some examples of housing support services for international students. And one example is University of Alberta in Canada. And students living on the campus are being asked to move out as soon as the cancellation of in-person exams due to COVID-19. But students who cannot immediately find other places to live are able to stay in residence. So this university also has a group of students named International Students Association, and this group supports students who have nowhere to go. And another example is Waseda University in Japan. This university has the largest number of international students in Japan. During this pandemic, international student special aid is available for international students living in dorms. In Japan, unlike the US and Canada, international students are allowed to work, and in fact, 76% of international students have part-time job to pay rent, food, and mobile phone bills. So, being unable to work due to virus, many students have very urgent cash flow problems. So, those financial aid for residents is quite supportive. The situation about students' residence is completely dependent on each college's decisions. So, you have to know that not all international students are as lucky as those who can reach those supports. Even though there are those who can continue to live on campus, they are suffering from other problems like dealing with loneliness and anxiety. With many schools are taking precautions such as moving students into single room, they have become more isolated. While that's good in terms of public health, it can make for a lonely experience. On the other hand, those who can return to their home countries suffer from other problems related to time zone, which is lead to next point.
Okay, next part is about time zone and coursework. As Odin and Sek explained, some international students have to take courses remotely from their home country. Most of universities offer options the way of taking courses for international students, but some courses are conducted in real time, such as discussion courses. This real-time course cause time zone difference difficulties for international students. The example of difficulties, first, they have to change sleeping routines greatly. One student from India, he wakes up at 6 p.m. and go to sleep at 9 a.m. in order to attend his classes. And second, changing sleeping routines cause to decrease their sleeping quality, so it's hard to perform as well as they would like. And third, they take classes in midnight, so lack of daylight affects their mood and energy for studying. And lastly, some international students are worried that having classes in midnight and sleeping in the morning may disrupt the schedule of the rest of their family if the international student live with their family. And one student from University of Alberta said, I sleep in the morning and stay up all night. It does not feel normal at all.
We would like to suggest our solution for those problems, and that is asynchronous academic requirements. Many of the issues identified are huge in scale and will require large-scale government investment in terms of financial aid or travel requirements. To approach this issue in terms of feasibility, requiring university to accommodate asynchronous learning could solve issues around time zone and in-person difficulties in a manageable way. Time zone differences would no longer be much of an issue, and also residence requirements would not be necessary if schooling can be done at home, no matter where it is in the world, instead of in person.
And asynchronous learning is not necessarily a catch-all solution. However, it is a good first step in accommodating the challenges faced disproportionately by international students. Not all programs can be taught asynchronously, but those that can be should be identified and prioritized to reduce the overall stress of the pandemic. And by making school easier for a large portion of international students, more resources can be focused on in-person accommodations for certain STEM or laboratory-based programs.
This can also go further than just your normative coursework framework of how you view asynchronous learning. This can also be applied to dynamic office hours, academic advising, and support services that could be explored to lessen the burden faced especially by international students. Increased time availabilities or online site revamping for certain support services can make navigating the pandemic that much easier. The exploration of peer-to-peer support programs to assist specifically for international related accommodation can also benefit. I'd like to end on a quote from the Vice President External of the University of Alberta International Students Association. If non-asynchronous learning continues to happen and international students don't see support from their own university in times of the pandemic, then for sure, there will be a loss of international students at the U of A. The problems faced by international students are huge, but by analyzing what is feasible, we can make adjusting to the new normal just that much easier. Thank you for your time, everyone.
So I intrigued by this concept of asynchronous scheduling, and particularly interested in the suggestion you had of dynamic office hours. So it's quite easy for many people to imagine students shifting their time, but on the professor side and on the organizational side, a university, that's a very intriguing idea. Can you give some more comments on that? How would you imagine something, a dynamic office hours?
Yes, it wouldn't be able to work in every circumstance, but I believe there would be many circumstances where different routes could be explored to have different time zones for TAs especially would be a big part of this, that for larger classes with TAs and students that might be located around the globe with different time zones, you could potentially have a greater service with, I guess, a more spread out course instructor base. If you have access to these TAs, if you're able to reserve maybe just some time outside of a normal schedule to adjust, you could make some situations easier for a lot of students, I think, by looking at that as a possibility.
I was just thinking about our institutional agreements. So, you know, the University of Alberta has a number of institutional agreements with universities in Japan, for example. So if the student's in Japan and we have a TA in Japan, that could lead to a simple solution.
It seems to me that you were talking about two kinds of students, but I might be mistaken. One kind of student is the international student that, so to speak, was stuck in Canada or stuck in Japan as a result of the pandemic. So they could not go home. They did not have access to certain financial support. And then the second kind of student is the international student who is at home and is continuing their studies in a Japanese or perhaps a Canadian university, and they are struggling with time zone issues. Am I correct? And if I am, could you distinguish which issues were most important to each of those groups?
Yeah, absolutely. There are, I guess, those two groups as you described them. And I think the main issue there is that divide is because the differences that sort them are relatively outside of an academic institution's control. A lot of the difference of if you are on campus and unable to return, or if you have returned home, is often on the travel requirements or the financial aid that you can receive. And that's largely out of the hands of the university or host institution. Figuring out how to deal with both of these, I think looking at it on a smaller and more feasible scale at the institution to look and say, we can't control to have everyone here or everyone at their original home. However, we can control that those who find themselves in the situation of going home and in a more difficult situation, we can introduce more asynchronous measures to accommodate them. So then the students outside of our control who still remain here, then we can use the more traditional resources and accommodate them in a more socially distanced manner in terms of residences and any in-person coursework. So basically just knocking it down from a government level to a more institutional level, and then being able to do what's feasible to help accommodate those who can't always decide what their preference is.